the Royal Flying Corps is taking devastating losses over the Western Front. British pilots are flying outdated aircraft against superior German Albatros D-series fighters. In just 1 month, over 300 airmen were lost. The average pilot's life expectancy is just 17.5 flying hours. In late February 1917, after the brutal battles of the previous year, the exhausted German army withdrew to the Hindenburg Line. A shorter, stronger defensive front that was easier to hold and needed fewer troops. As British patrols followed the withdrawing German army, they were brought to a standstill by the difficult ground and heavy defences. This line quickly became the focus of Allied operations throughout 1917. French Commander-in-Chief Robert Nivelle was promising to end the stalemate with one massive offensive. His plan called for French forces to attack along the Aisne front, while the British and Canadians would strike further north at Arras, Vimy Ridge and Bullecourt. Air superiority was seen as essential to the success of the offensive. General Hugh Trenchard, commander of the Royal Flying Corps, was a firm believer in the offensive use of air power. He wanted his pilots over enemy lines, not sitting idle behind the front. When the Battle of Arras began, more than 2.5 million shells were fired in the preliminary bombardment, 1 million more than at the Battle of the Somme. As troops went over the top, they were supported by a creeping barrage of artillery, and the results were initially impressive. The Royal Flying Corps was tasked with close air support, reconnaissance, bombing operations and artillery spotting. But in the spring of 1917, the RFC's aircraft were starting to show their age. Since late 1916, the Germans had held the upper hand in the air war, with the Albatros D-series giving German pilots a distinct advantage over many contemporary British types. Reconnaissance and bomber crews were still flying slow, vulnerable machines such as the BE-2, RE-8 and FE-2B that were easy prey for the faster, twin-gunned Albatros D-series. Fighter cover was provided by Nieuport 17s and Sopwith Pups, but these failed to match the German fighters in both speed and firepower. Despite this, reconnaissance flights continued daily. Pilots and observers carried out artillery spotting, trench photography and bombing runs, often at low altitude and slow speed, directly over enemy lines. It was dangerous work at the best of times, and the lack of parachutes for British pilots made survival even less likely. Unfortunately, things were only going to get worse still for the pilots of the RFC. In March, a new German fighter squadron arrived at the front, Jagdstaffel 11, commanded by a young cavalry officer named Manfred von Richthofen, the man who would become known to history as the Red Baron. Under Richthofen's leadership, Jasta 11 became one of the most feared units on the Western Front, with some sources attributing them with over a third of all British losses throughout April 1917. Ernst Junger, a German infantry officer, later recalled, "During these days, there was a whole series of dogfights which almost invariably ended up in defeat for the British, since it was Richthofen's squadron they were up against. Often 5 or 6 planes in succession would be chased away or shot down in flames." These heavy casualties created a desperate shortage of RFC pilots. As a result, training programs were shortened and new recruits were sent to the front with only the bare minimum of flying experience. Many of these young men lasted only a day or two in combat before being killed. In contrast, German training and unit organisation emphasised experienced leaders and tactical cohesion. After suffering their own setbacks in 1916, the Germans had reorganised their air service, forming dedicated fighter squadrons known as Jastas. These were led by highly experienced combat pilots, many of them veterans of the early air war, and they were equipped with the excellent Albatros D3 fighter, although in much lower numbers than the RFC. But this numerical inferiority and defensive stance actually worked to their advantage. They fought almost entirely over their own territory, giving them greater tactical choices as to when and where they would engage the enemy. And if they were shot down and fortunate enough to survive, they would come down behind friendly lines rather than falling into enemy captivity. By the end of April, the RFC had lost 245 aircraft, with 211 aircrew killed or missing and 108 captured. The German Air Force, by comparison, had lost just 66 aircraft. This period became known as Bloody April, and it marked the lowest point of the war for the Royal Flying Corps. But even with these terrible losses, the German Air Force was unable to prevent the Royal Flying Corps from fulfilling its vital role. Throughout the Arras offensive, RFC squadrons continued to operate relentlessly, capturing aerial photographs, directing artillery fire, and carrying out bombing missions deep behind enemy lines. Above all, though, it was the artillery observation that proved indispensable, guiding British guns with precision and allowing them to maintain their dominance throughout the battle. All of this resulted in a British advance of 3.5 miles, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was actually the furthest they had moved since trench warfare had begun in 1914. But the momentum wouldn't last. German reinforcements arrived, and once again the fighting soon bogged down into the familiar nightmare of stalemate trench warfare. By the middle of May, the entire offensive was called off. The devastating losses of Bloody April exposed how vulnerable the Royal Flying Corps and Royal Naval Air Service aircraft had become to German fighters. It was clear that Britain urgently needed a new generation of airplanes, with greater speed and manoeuvrability alongside a heavier armament. Back in England the previous year, at the Sopwith facility in Kingston upon Thames, Chief Designer Herbert Smith had begun work on a new Scout, the Sopwith F1. It featured a conventional design for its time, with a wire-braced wooden box girder fuselage, an aluminium engine cowling, plywood panels around the cockpit, and fabric-covered wings, tail and fuselage. It was a direct development of his earlier and very successful Sopwith Pup, and while the two aircraft looked alike, their flying characteristics couldn't have been more different. The Pup was lightweight, forgiving and easy to fly. British ace James McCudden described it as a remarkably fine machine for general all-round flying. It was so extremely light and well surfaced that after a little practice, one could almost land it on a tennis court. The new F1, however, was a very different beast. It was bigger, heavier, and far more difficult to fly. The Big Pup, as it was initially nicknamed by pilots, was also more heavily armed, being the first British-designed Scout to enter service with twin Vickers machine guns mounted directly in front of the cockpit. A synchronization gear allowed the guns to fire through the spinning propeller without hitting the blades. To prevent the guns from freezing at altitude, a metal fairing was fitted over their breeches. This humped fairing is what gave the aircraft its famous nickname, the Camel. On the 22nd of December 1916, Australian aviation pioneer Harry Hawker flew the first prototype from Brooklands in Weybridge, Surrey, which at the time was a major hub of British aviation technological development and nowadays is a rather fantastic museum. Unlike the Pup's gentle and forgiving nature, the Sopwith Camel was sensitive on the controls and notoriously difficult to fly. The majority of its weight, the engine, fuel tank and guns, was packed into the forward fuselage. The rotary engine's powerful gyroscopic force resulted in asymmetric handling. Left turns were sluggish and tended to raise the nose, while right turns could be much tighter with a marked nose drop. Consequently, some pilots preferred to make a sweeping 270-degree right turn rather than a simple 90-degree left turn. It had a top speed of 113 miles per hour, a range of 300 miles and a service ceiling of 19,000 feet. When it entered service, the Camel quickly gained a grim reputation among trainee pilots. Its awkward centre of gravity, sensitive controls and difficult ground handling caused many crashes on takeoff. Once airborne, if the aircraft stalled, it would drop into a violent spin that was difficult to recover from. For inexperienced flyers, the Camel could be deadly. Lieutenant Colonel L.A. Strange of the Central Flying School recalled in Recollections of an Airman, "In spite of the care we took, Camels continually spun down out of control when flown by pupils on their first solos. At length, with the assistance of Lieutenant Morgan, who managed our workshops, I took the main tank out of several Camels and replaced them with smaller ones, which enabled us to fit dual controls. These conversions and the introduction of dual instruction helped reduce the appalling number of accidents during the early training stages." Yet it was these very quirks, its instability and sensitive controls, that made the Camel such a formidable dogfighter. Pilots joked that it offered a choice between a wooden cross, Red Cross or Victoria Cross. As aviation historian Robert Jackson observed, in the hands of a novice, it displayed vicious characteristics that could make it a killer. But under the firm touch of a skilled pilot who knew how to turn its vices to his own advantage, it was one of the most superb fighting machines ever built, as would be seen when the Sopwith Camel finally arrived on the Western Front in June of 1917. Number 4 Squadron of the Royal Naval Air Service, based at Bray Dunes just north of Dunkirk, was the first unit to operate the Sopwith Camel, and the squadron wasted no time in putting the new aircraft to use. On the evening of the 5th of June, Flight Commander Alexander MacDonald Shook recorded the first official combat victories in a Camel. While patrolling off the coast of Belgium, he encountered approximately 15 enemy aircraft and successfully shot down a German Albatros D3 and a two-seater. These victories elevated Shook to ace status, having previously claimed 3 kills in April and May while flying a Sopwith Pup. There are reports of an earlier engagement on the 4th of June near Newport where Shook is said to have attacked another two-seater, though no official record of that encounter actually exists. On the 13th of June, No. 70 Squadron became the first unit in the Royal Flying Corps to receive the Sopwith Camel, achieving full operational strength by early July. Based just behind the front lines near Arras, the squadron saw its first combat on the evening of the 27th of June. Captain Clive Collett, flying Camel B3756, downed an Albatros D5 over Ypres, marking the first confirmed victory in a Camel by an RFC pilot. By September, the New Zealand-born Collett had amassed 11 aerial victories. On the 12th of July, just 15 days after Collett's success, Captain Webb also scored a victory against an Albatros reconnaissance airplane, notably flying the same aircraft, B3756. On the evening of the 17th, Captain Webb was leading a patrol of Sopwith Camels over Belgium, where they encountered Jaster 11, the famed German fighter squadron. In the ensuing fight, Collett and his fellow pilots capitalised on the Camel's superior agility and firepower, downing 5 enemy aircraft and wounding another pilot. The encounter marked a dramatic reversal of fortunes for the RFC, contrasting sharply with the devastating losses endured just months earlier during Bloody April. Experienced pilots were impressed with Sopwith's new Camel. Lieutenant Leonard Henry Rochford from 3 Naval Squadron remarked, "By the middle of July, the Camel had completely replaced our pups. Although the pup was a delightful little aeroplane to fly, the Camel was undoubtedly a much superior fighting machine." From September 1917 to September 1918, Wing Commander William George Barker, Canada's most highly decorated serviceman, scored 46 victories against enemy aircraft and balloons. His Camel, tail number B6313, is the aircraft with the highest number of confirmed kills in World War I. By February 1918, 13 squadrons had been primarily outfitted with Camels. Alongside the Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5A and the French SPAD S-13, these aircraft played a crucial role in helping the Allies regain air superiority, for the time being at least. While the Sopwith Camel is best remembered for its exploits over the Western Front, it also played a vital role in defending Britain itself. Beginning in July 1917, The Royal Naval Air Service deployed Camels from Eastchurch and Manston airfields to intercept German bombers, most notably Gothas, during daylight raids. The increasing frequency of these attacks prompted the Royal Flying Corps to redirect several squadrons of Camels originally bound for France to home defence duties. By March 1918, the Camel had become a mainstay of Britain's defensive squadrons. As German forces shifted to nighttime bombing raids, the Sopwith Camel demonstrated its adaptability by proving suitable for night operations. Aircraft assigned to home defence squadrons were swiftly outfitted with navigation lights, enabling them to function as night fighters. A select number of Camels underwent more substantial modifications. Their synchronised Vickers machine guns were replaced with over-wing Lewis guns. Not only did this preserve the pilot's night vision by relocating muzzle flashes above the line of sight, it permitted the use of powerful incendiary ammunition that was unsafe to fire through synchronised Vickers guns. Throughout 1918, Camels engaged incoming raiders with increasing success. During the final major air raid on Britain on the night of the 21st of May 1918, a combined force of 74 Camels and SE-5s intercepted 28 German Gotha and Zeppelin Starken bombers. 3 enemy aircraft were destroyed in combat, 2 more by anti-aircraft fire and another lost to engine failure, the heaviest losses ever sustained by German bombers in a single night's operation over England. The Sopwith 2F1 Camel, often referred to as the ship's Camel, was a specialised naval variation of the standard F1 Camel, designed for operations at sea by the Royal Naval Air Service. Developed to meet the unique demands of shipboard aviation, the 2F1 featured several key modifications. It had a shorter wingspan and removable rear fuselage for improved handling and storage aboard ships. They were typically fitted with Bentley BR series rotary engines, which offered reliable performance in maritime conditions. Many were also subject to armament changes. On some of the airplanes, one of the 2 synchronised Vickers machine guns was replaced with an overwing Lewis gun. This allowed the firing of incendiary ammunition, which was essential for engaging Zeppelins. These aircraft were deployed from platforms mounted on the turrets of major warships and from some of the earliest aircraft carriers, most notably HMS Furious. Furious played a pioneering role in naval aviation, launching Camels directly from its deck to intercept enemy airships and conduct reconnaissance missions. The 2F Camel was also launched from aircraft lighters, specially modified barges towed at high speed by destroyers or other vessels. These lighters enabled the forward deployment of scouts, allowing them to intercept incoming German bombers and Zeppelins from positions far beyond the reach of shore-based airfields. Despite all of its successes, by mid-1918, the rapid technological progress of the time had left the Camel increasingly outclassed as a frontline fighter. The introduction of the formidable Fokker D7 exposed the Camel's limitations. At higher altitudes and in sustained climbs, the Camel couldn't match the performance of newer German fighters. Nevertheless, the Camel's agility and robust construction ensured it remained a valuable asset in other roles. As the air war evolved, the aircraft was reassigned to ground attack missions, where it proved extremely effective. Armed with Cooper bombs and twin synchronised Vickers machine guns, the Camel was used to strafe enemy trenches, supply lines and troop concentrations. These low-level attacks inflicted significant damage on German forces, but at great risk to the pilots, who faced intense ground fire and the ever-present risk of mechanical failure during high-speed dives. The new Sopwith Snipe, delayed by development problems and wartime production bottlenecks, didn't reach the front in significant numbers until the closing months of the war. As a result, the Camel remained in widespread service until the armistice in November 1918 and beyond. The Royal Air Force officially retired the Sopwith Camel in 1920, marking the end of its frontline service in Britain. However, the aircraft's legacy endured well into the 1920s, as several other nations continued to operate it in both combat and training roles. Its notoriously challenging flight characteristics ultimately became its greatest strength. While unforgiving to inexperienced pilots, often resulting in fatal accidents, it rewarded skill and precision with strong combat performance. In the hands of a seasoned aviator, the Camel was lethal, turning many of its pilots into aces. With its distinctive silhouette and combat record, the Camel became one of the most iconic aircraft of the First World War. Credited with 1,294 confirmed aerial victories, it holds the distinction of being the most successful Allied fighter of the conflict.